Aratus was by natural bent a statesman, high-minded, more exact in his public than in his private relations, a bitter hater of tyrants, and ever making a regard for the public weal determine his enmity or his friendship. Wherefore, he seems to have proved not so much a strict friend as a considerate and mild enemy, changing his ground in either direction according to the exigencies of the state, loving concord between nations, community of cities, and unanimity of council and assembly, beyond all other blessings. It was manifest that he resorted to open warfare and strife without courage and with little confidence, but that in stealing advantages and secretly managing cities and tyrants he was most proficient. Therefore, though he won many unexpected successes where he showed courage, he seems to have lost no fewer favourable opportunities through over-caution. For not only in the case of certain wild beasts, as it would seem, is the vision strong by night, but wholly blinded in the daytime, since the humour in their eyes is too dry and delicate to bear contact with the light, but there is also in some men a cleverness and sagacity which is prone to be confounded in transactions that are carried out under the open sky and proclaimed abroad by public criers, but when confronting hidden and secret enterprises recovers its courage. Such unevenness a lack of philosophy may cause in men of good natural parts. They produce virtue without scientific knowledge, and it is like spontaneous and uncultivated fruit. This can be proved by examples. Aratus now, after uniting himself and his city with the Achaeans, served in the cavalry, and was beloved by his commanders on account of his ready obedience. For although he had made great contributions to the commonwealth in his own reputation and the power of his native city, he gave his services, like those of any ordinary person, to the one who from time to time was the general of the Achaeans, whether he was a man of Dume, or of Tritaea, or of a meaner city. And there came to him also a gift of money from the king of Egypt, 25 talents. These Aratus accepted, but gave them at once to his fellow citizens, who were in want of money, especially for the ransoming of such as had been taken prisoners. But the exiles were not to be dissuaded from molesting those who were in possession of their property, and the city was in danger of an upheaval. Aratus saw that his only hope was in the generosity of Prolemy, and therefore determined to sail to Egypt, and begged the king to furnish him with money for the settlement of these disputes. So he put to sea from Maphone above Malea, intending to make the shortest passage, but the steersman could not make head against the strong wind and high waves that came in from the open sea, and being carried out of his course, got with difficulty to Adria, which was a hostile place, for it was in the power of Antigonus, and held a garrison of his. Aratus anticipated the rest by landing, and forsaking the ship, withdrew a long way from the sea, having with him one of his friends, Timanthes. They threw themselves into a place that was thickly covered with woods, and had a grievous night of it. A little later the commander of the garrison came to the ship in search of Aratus, but was deceived by his servants, who had been instructed to say that he had run off at once and had sailed off to Euboea. The ship, however, with its cargo and the servants of Aratus, was declared a prize of war and detained. After a few days, while still in this helpless plight, Aratus met with a rare piece of good fortune, for a Roman ship put in at the place where he was staying, sometimes on a lookout place and sometimes hiding himself. The ship was bound for Syria, but after going on board, Aratus persuaded the master of the vessel to convey him as far as Caria. Thither he was conveyed, encountering fresh perils by sea and perils as great as before. From Caria, after a long time, he made his way across to Egypt, and found the king both naturally well disposed towards him, and much gratified because Aratus had sent him drawings and paintings from Greece. In these matters Aratus had a refined judgment, and was continually collecting and acquiring works of artistic skill and excellence, especially those of Pamphilus and Melanthus. These he would send to Ptolemy. For the fame of Sikyon's refined and beautiful paintings was still in full bloom, and they alone were thought to have a beauty that was indestructible. Therefore even the great Apelles, when he was already admired, came to Sikyon and gave a talent that he might be admitted into the society of its artists, desiring to share their fame rather than their art. Hence it was that Aratus, although he at once destroyed the other portraits of the tyrants, when he had given the city its freedom, deliberated a long time about that of Aratus, who flourished in the time of Philip of Macedon. For it was the work of Melanthus and all his pupils, and Aratus was painted standing by a chariot in which was a victory. Apelles also had a hand in the painting, as we are told by Prolemy, the topographer, and the work was a marvellous one, so that Aratus was moved by the artistic skill therein. But afterwards, such was his hatred of the tyrants, that he ordered it to be removed and destroyed. Accordingly, the painter Neocles, who was a friend of Aratus, interceded with him for the picture, as we are told, with tears, and when he could not persuade him, said that war should be waged against the tyrants, but not against the treasures of the tyrants. Let us therefore leave the chariot and the victory, but Aratus himself I will undertake to remove from the picture. Aratus therefore yielded, and Neocles erased the figure of Aratus, and in its place painted a palm tree merely, not daring to introduce anything else. We are told, however, that the feet of the erased figure of Aratus were left by an oversight beneath the chariot. In consequence of this love of art, Aratus was already beloved by the king, and in personal intercourse grew yet more upon him, and he received for his city a gift of 150 talents. 40 of these Aratus took with him at once and sailed to the Peloponnesus. The rest the king divided into instalments, and sent them to him afterwards, one by one. Now it was a great achievement to procure so large a sum of money for his fellow citizens. Other generals and leaders of the people had taken but a fraction of this sum from kings in payment for wrongdoing, enslaving, and betraying to them their native cities. But it was a far greater achievement by means of this money to have effected a harmonious adjustment of the disputes between rich and poor, and safety and security for the entire people. Moreover, we must admire the moderation of the man in the exercise of so great power, for when he was appointed independent arbiter, with absolute powers for settling the money affairs of the exiles, he would not accept the office alone, but associated with himself 15 of his fellow citizens, by whose aid, after much toil and great trouble, he established peace and friendship among his fellow citizens. For these services, not only did the entire body of citizens, bestow fitting public honours upon him, but the exiles also, on their own account, erected a bronze statue of him, and inscribed thereon the following elegiac verses: "The counsels, valorous deeds, and prowess on behalf of Hellas, which this man has displayed, are known as far as the Pillars of Hercules. But we who achieved our return through thee, Aratus, for thy virtue and justice, have erected to the Saviour gods this statue of our Saviour, because to thy native city thou hast brought a sacred and heavenly reign of law." These successful achievements placed Aratus beyond the jealousy of his fellow citizens, owing to the gratitude which he inspired. But Antigonus, the king, was annoyed by the policy of Aratus and wished either to bring him over into complete friendship with himself or to alienate him from Prolemy. He therefore showed him many kindnesses which were not at all welcome, and especially this, that as he was sacrificing to the gods at Corinth, he sent portions of the victims to Aratus at Sikyon. And at the banquet which followed, where many guests were present, he said, so that all could hear, "I thought this Sicyonian youth was merely free-spirited and a lover of his fellow citizens, but he would seem to be a capable judge also of the lives and actions of kings. For formerly he was inclined to overlook us, fixing his hopes elsewhere, and he admired the wealth of Egypt, hearing tales of its elephants and fleets and palaces. But now that he has been behind the scenes and seen that everything in Egypt is play acting and painted scenery, he has come over entirely to us. Therefore I both welcome the young man himself, having determined to make every possible use of him, and I ask you to consider him a friend." These words were seized upon by the envious and malevolent, who vied with one another in writing to Prolemy many grievous charges against Aratus, so that the king sent an envoy and upbraided him. "So great malice and envy attend upon the friendships of kings and tyrants, for which men strive and at which they aim with ardent passion." Aratus now, having been chosen general of the Achaean League for the first time, ravaged the opposite territories of Locris and Caledonia, and went to the assistance of the Boeotians with an army of 10,000 men. He came too late, however, for the battle at Chaeronea, in which the Boeotians were defeated by the Aetolians, with the loss of Aboiocritus, the Plutarch, and 1,000 men. A year later, being general again, he set foot on the enterprise for the recovery of Acorinthus, not in the interest of Sicyonians or Achaeans merely, but purposing to drive from that stronghold what held all Hellas in a common subjection, the Macedonian garrison. Chares the Athenian, having been successful in a battle with the king's generals, wrote to the people of Athens that he had won a battle which was sister to that at Marathon, and this enterprise of Aratus may be rightly called a sister of those of Pelopidas the Theban and Thrasybulus the Athenian, in which they slew tyrants, except that it surpassed them in being undertaken not against Greeks, but against a foreign and alien power. For the Isthmus of Corinth, forming a barrier between the seas, brings together the two regions, and thus unites our continent. And when Acorinthus, which is a lofty hill springing up at this centre of Greece, is held by a garrison, it hinders and cuts off all the countries south of the Isthmus from intercourse, transits, and the carrying on of military expeditions by land and sea, and makes him who controls the place with a garrison sole lord of Greece. Therefore it is thought that the younger Philip of Macedon, uttered no jest but the truth whenever he called the city of Corinth the fetters of Greece.